Within our TTRPG world, something we tend to want and long for as dungeon masters and players are to be in living, breathing, immersive worlds. I understand, as well as the next guy, that that's no easy task to see done. There are a lot of elements that can come into immersion, but one that's always been interesting to me is that we create all of these strange new creatures, unimaginable power, or odd creations, and we just introduce them into the natural world. We really meddle with the ecology of our worlds and pay it not too much mind at all. I've had a bit of a fascination and fixation with ecology in recent times. It is something that I can see not only as something to explore in a world-building sense, but also something that happens to be a pretty good story structure, but that's a different video for a different day. For now, I'd like to just point out that ecology is, in its barest sense, it's the general study of how the ecosystems form, maintain, and fall apart, and the whole A to Z of all those elements. There are videos by Crash Course that really go in depth, breaking into the various different types of transfer of energy between natural resources, primary, secondary sources, to be used and create ecosystem. I think there's something to be said about our TTRPG worlds and our own world building that comes with it. There are so many fantastical creatures, even something as simple as a dire wolf. Being a wolf of incredible size would directly impact the ecology. It would impact the hunting of other animals and the need to feed on more animals for the energy it needs. It would impact the carcasses and the decomposition of the carcasses, how many nutrients are available when these larger creatures die. But that's hardly the end of it. Fantasy monsters come in all shapes and sizes. Small, medium, large, gargantuan, colossal. We're talking stuff as small as a flump all the way to as big as an ancient dragon. What can we do to construct all of these different creatures to exist in a single ecosystem? Well, that'd be one heck of a daunting task, and if it's something you'd really like me to talk more on, please let me know in the comments if you find this video interesting. I can approach other monsters in an ecological sense, see how a liberal arts major thinks science is cool, but definitely didn't think it was my calling in life, would be able to interpret the general amateur approach to world building in an ecological sense. With that said, I do still want to further prove what I'm talking about when it comes to general ecology and these strange fantasy monsters. So how do I do that? There are three in particular that I'd like to touch on today. We'll go in no particular order with them, but why not start with the one that closely resembles things that are already apparent in our ecosystem. Mostly because of the name of it's just two different real-life animals smashed together. I'm of course talking about the Owlbear. If you didn't know, and if you've been around on the channel long enough, or chat me up on Blue Sky, you might know that the Owlbear is one of my favorites. Just the general charm of a fantastical creature. It is the epitome of childhood wonder of what if we take A and B and smash them together until we make C. What makes an owlbear interesting from an ecological discussion? Well, we're talking about something as big and heavy as a polar bear, chilling in the most general forest environments, and beyond that, I've seen people create custom owlbears that can adapt to any number of settings. So what makes the bear so dangerous? A lot of them are big. There was an expression that came up while I was doing the initial research on this video where people were talking about bears on Reddit. The expression is, if it's brown, lie down, if it's black, fight back, and if it's white, good night. That is to say, there are different verbal strategies as to surviving an encounter with a bear. Whether it be play dead, try and be big and intimidating, or just accept the totality of death in the grand scheme of encountering a polar bear. With an owlbear and a polar bear, they're going to be as close as we can get to analogs to one another. They're both apex predators. Bears are mighty creatures. They're large, powerful. Like I said earlier, they're able to climb trees and they're able to swim. If you've never dealt with them in real life, consider yourself lucky. I might welcome you to pull into a fairly low-level save file in Skyrim and learn their power and feel the eeriness of having that sound of the bear growl and roar, and understanding that you best hope you're an archer build who can outrun it and then try and snap them out of existence. Because ecology is where energy comes from and where it goes and those relationships, in a lot of ways life sees energy as food. Bears are versatile creatures. A lot of black bears tend to lean more into predominantly vegetation, plant seeds, nuts, whatever, and less meat, whereas you have the polar bear who really predominantly have meat available to them, so there's definitely a range there. So what's a bear's role in ecology? It has three big roles. So seed dispersal, which is an underappreciated in a lot of ways. Similar to our pollinators, there's a lot of mammals who are responsible for grabbing the seeds of the plants that they've eaten from. They get caught up in the fur. I mean, if you've ever been outside doing yard work, there's plenty of times where you've been a seed disperser. Things catch on your pants or your legs and you brush them off before going inside. You've played a role in the environment. The second is predation. It sets up exactly what it sounds like. The relationship of kill or be killed, hunted, eaten, or prey-oriented stuff. And the follow-up to that would be nutrient recycling and enrichment, because a bear will, if it's hunting food, create enrichment for the environment in about two different ways. Not only by, more than likely, leaving a corpse behind, and when it eventually passes, biological waste. It further livens up the nutrients in the ground that the primary sources may need. This leads me to the fact that bears are heavily in-demand creatures. They are capable of impacting vegetation, they are capable of impacting animals, they go wherever they want. So, what else do we have? This goes on a slight perspective thing before we ultimately cycle back onto what I see as the impact of the difference between a bear and an owlbear, but what keeps bears from being the apex predator? They are much more present and around than a lot of other big critters. They are available to human societies and could easily sometimes do harm. Well, there are three factors as to what slows bears down in conquering the world. That is their slow maturity rate. They stay babies and adolescents longer than a lot of other creatures. That can make it to where a younger cub is more at risk to being killed. There are low litter sizes, which is a big one that'll probably hold on to. If one bear doesn't make 10 bears, then yeah, that's going to affect the population. The last one is the natural predator of the bears. What do I mean by that? There aren't many creatures out there that are deciding to get them a chunk of bear meat, because in the natural world as a whole, the path of least resistance is often sought after. In nature, energy is precious to the various life forms, so if you can fight and hunt a rabbit versus fight and hunt a bear, you're almost always going to pick the rabbit because there's less risk there, less energy expended. But that doesn't mean there isn't a predator that hunts the hunter. By predator, if I'm being generous, I mean the leading cause of death, and shock of all shocks, it's humans. Humans can, in a lot of ways, topple the environment, throw ecology off, uproot whole ecosystems just based on sport hunting, overhunting, poaching, general deforestation, expansion of cities, suburbs, and all that kind of stuff. There are a lot of ways in which the human race plays a huge role in keeping the bears at bay. The other thing that I want to look at is the less dominant part of the owlbear. That is to say that owls are not impressive because they aren't exceptional hunters. Birds are almost always such perceptive critters, being able to be up in the sky and dive down on their prey, or be able to see at night, which in particular would be an owl's preferred time of the day to be hunting. But owls are known for their razor-sharp talons, and what do all these things mean? That means you have something that is on the bigger end of a bear on average, and can be deadly during day or night, likely has immense capabilities of being able to climb trees, climb up mountains, swim through rivers, and be able to follow and hunt whatever it needs to, wherever it needs to. That's not going to be easy to fit into the natural ecology of the world. Well, one owlbear alone, as even if we just look at the very first owlbear, and a wizard did it, a wizard took a owl and a bear and magically combined them, setting it loose into the environment, the owlbear will be killing and hunting in order to live and survive. There's something interesting that could be discussed and seen with other natural species that might be the prey of the owlbear and how they evolve with anti-predator adaptations. And given how great of a hunter this creature will be, there's every chance there would be a great number of changes due to it. So we have to look at this as world builders. If we don't want to completely uproot the ecology of our setting, but still want to have an encounter with a wild owlbear to be possible, what can we do? There's a few different elements I want you to look at. It needs to be a big deal. Towns would likely have warning signs, or it would be a cautionary tale told in the pub or tavern. In addition to that, the local mayor, baron, or whoever may organize hefty rewards or bounties on such creatures, since in a lot of ways a smaller local village won't be interested in particular efforts of conservation. Should the owlbear want to be studied or observed, they would be far more interested in the eradication of them. As I said, if the greatest hunter of the bears is humans, then the creation races of the world may be paid and enlisted to set traps, group up and try and ambush the owlbear, but it'll be done with a great amount of caution. With that, I'd like to touch on the fact that I give it the slow reproduction and maturity aspects, which is what I've been looking at with not only the real natural world, but I think in a lot of conclusions I've been coming to with a lot of these fantastical creatures is to slow down their reproduction. Because if owlbears procreate super quickly and they have a lot of offspring, look at almost any element of the Alien franchise with the xenomorph. Once you have an apex hunter that can grow into full maturity in hours and is super dangerous, they tend to hunt whatever they want and tend to hunt other races into extinction. Thus, we will breathe a little bit of restraint into our owl bears and give them again the slow climb to maturity, which plenty of parties would probably experience, because a very, very common follow-up with owl bears is the desire to keep that treasured owlbear egg or the owlbear cub. It's happened in parties that I've been a part of, certainly, but you can go and slay an owlbear, capture an owlbear, or perhaps you come across a poacher or hunter and they have an owlbear egg that they are willing to sell you. This leads to a secondary conversation that beyond humans in the real world, as boring as they might be, however, they don't hold a light to the apex predator that's known as the adventurer. Yes, the ecological impact that a spellslinger or a powerful barbarian might have on the world could be noticeable on a higher end of creatures. Now, obviously, there would be a whole other different video and discussion about how high magic could terraform and completely change the ecology in a matter of minutes. Again, if that's something you want me to explore, you just let me know. Leave a comment, leave a like, hit that subscribe button if you haven't. We have fun here. But I really think there's potential that adventurers would not only hunt owlbears, making their mortality rate questionable and make them less aggressive to attack creation race societies, but also since bears tend to make smaller litters, what if an owlbear only laid a few eggs? This would then mean that a poacher, hunter, or group who has recently slain an owlbear has the opportunity to do a lot of impactful damage to this super apex predator on behalf of the ecosystem. I think an owlbear could easily replicate a lot of the same ecology that a bear does, with spreading seeds, bigger body, feathers. Spreading seeds, those are more nutrients, nest building capabilities that would offer other animals the sense of molting and gradation. It's going to naturally happen with almost anything that I would talk about that has a challenge rating. I think that sets a good standard of conversation because we have this fantastical creature who is just the bigger, badder version of what already exists in the natural world. Even imagining an owlbear in the modern, real-world setting, I think they would still be terrifying to us, even in the age of accessible firearms or being in an automobile more often than not, and crossing one or anything like that. However, this does bring up the conversation of what hunts the hunter. Perhaps there are creatures like that. Even when we look at the real world and see the bigger, nastier version of something as a bear, is it to an owlbear? Not quite. Quote the Phantom Menace, there's always a bigger fish in the sea. And as far as bigger fish, we have to toss it back to another one of my favorite fantasy monsters, the Bulette. I've done a 5-minute monsters on the Bulette. If you haven't seen it, go ahead, watch it. I cover a lot of the basics that can be done with Bulettes, but if you haven't watched it and you've not played Baldur's Gate and you've not really experienced a lot of D&D, the very quick way way I would summarize it is it's a tank on legs that isn't scared of anyone or anything and willing to eat everyone and everything. These are nasty, powerful creatures. They are typically around 9.5, 10 feet tall, 12 feet long. These guys are mini kaiju. Obviously not Godzilla-sized by any means, but certainly beyond what I can see as just a beast. This is something that's quite in a higher level size category in comparison to giants and dragons and their lot. Bullets offer a very different point of conversation. One I recently had about this exact subject matter, where my buddy Jack on Blue Sky had pointed out that a lot of folklore and mythology, monsters tend to not fit in the ecosystem, and they're naturally seen as very damaging and harmful, even caustic to it. If that's how you want your bullets, I could not argue with you, because these creatures are so big, so powerful, so dangerous. Yeah, I get it. They are mini natural disasters on legs. There are not many things that I could see even hunting an owlbear. However, a bullet certainly could. Maybe it has a preference for the taste of the meat or any other number of elements. Maybe it relishes the taste of the owlbear's eggs, so it hunts owlbears hoping that it just recently laid a fresh set of eggs. It could certainly be a challenge for a bullet because you have the owlbear that is still very dangerous in its own right, able to move a lot quicker and in a lot more different places than the bullet, but that's not to say the bullet is a chump either. There are a lot of reasons why it is deemed to be one of the toughest creatures for its CR, or the argument is made that its CR is woefully inaccurate. Now, as I said, I don't want to just touch on all the same elements of conversation and the ways that a creature can act and react and impact the environment, because a lot of them could very easily be similar. Then that doesn't actually offer you guys any new considerations. So, in a world where every creature that has a higher CR rating, owlbears, direwolves, bullets, if they are all these super mega hunter apex predators, then the world's just not going to survive, because monsters will cause endangerment, and then extinction, and then collapse of various ecosystems and environmental factors. There would be a societal implications too, and adaptations to the lack of food for people and wild animals. So maybe we dial back, pump the brakes a little bit on some of the elements of what a bullet does or how a bullet does. One that comes to mind is the fact that the bullet burrows. Impressively so. If you want to learn more about bullets as a whole, I know Mr. Rex has an exceptional video on bullets, where he goes into a lot more depth of what they do, how they take care of business, and we'll talk about another element of that in a little bit. Go ahead, check it out. But what if we played with them as the ambush predators that they already are? Two things come to mind to me, and they're alligator snapping turtles, which if you haven't seen, they really do just look like dragon turtles, but a lot smaller than an actual dragon turtle. They look cool, they're big, rigid, and can sit motionless for quite some time before popping out to take that nasty bite. But even if the alligator snapping turtle was the first creature that comes to mind, it doesn't quite capture the behavior and biological capacities. What if we talk about the Nile crocodile? They wait hours, days, weeks for their food. They can wait a long time and wait until the moment's right, because it goes back to the same conversation I had earlier. Energy. While a bullet can win almost any fight with any number of things in the monster manual, there's this give and take relationship with energy and the accessibility to food. If a bullet is as massive as it is, it's worth considering that it needs a lot to hunt. It needs a lot of food to be able to hunt. Or it needs a lot of energy and a lot of food to hunt the same ways that an owlbear might need to. And that being said, we already toted the owlbear as being particularly demanding on its environment, to where it will probably eat a large mixture of food in the form of plant vegetation and proper meat in order to get its full diet. A bullet, I don't know how picky they are, and I'd be curious to know what you guys imagine. A bullet can certainly hunt and kill animals, more so I imagine them being able to predominantly be carnivorous, and them being seen as land sharks in a lot of ways does kind of lean the same way, but with that I almost imagine they lay dormant underground, waiting until they can properly strike and eat, and then they spend the time eating and then moving to the next area to attack, because they don't have the luxury in their size to be super active. They understand that they need to save their energy because if they truly need it to fight, it has to be in reserve. I think in a lot of ways we can see it act as this lower maintenance creature, still impactful, still definitely important, but it doesn't have to be the aggressor or an agitator. It will eat, but it's not going to chew its way through a forest per se. However, this does segue me into a bit of a conversation I have been waiting to have for a while, a conversation that a friend of the channel, the one and only Mr. Welsh GM, brought it up for Dragon Week. It's something I've rambled on for a bit, and it's something that I've been obsessing over behind the scenes, and that is the concept of whale fall. For those who don't know, when a whale dies, it falls to the bottom of the ocean and creates a little micro-environment out of its body. There's a bunch of videos online, and I'm sure other articles and resources are available throughout the internet to talk about the exact correspondence that happens with a body and the stages of decay. But the very simple way I want you to break it down in the capacity of this video is when something that big, something that important dies, what happens after? Is it huge? If you've ever seen videos of whale falls, or like me had the luxury of seeing it on display at an aquarium recently, I think it would be very easy to see the fact that these large masses of skeleton, and in a Bulette's case, its plated armor would operate, would offer shelter, would offer so much food. It would offer the opportunity to boundless creatures that might come and find it. There would be those who sought it just to eat whatever fleshy meat it could get a hold of. There would be those who might make the chewed over body a home. There's a creature that might even adapt to specifically be able to consume the parts of the Bulette that might seem impenetrable to normal teeth. I know there are worms in the sea or worms in the oceans that don't even have mouths, but they dissolve the whale bone with corrosive acids. They leak the acid and dissolve the hardest parts of the whale in order to then absorb the nutrients from it with the aid of bacteria that tags along in the natural process. These are instances of experiences that happen because of whale fall. It's something that you can really explore if you want to, whether it be because you're wanting it to be a narrative element of your story, of, hey, we just killed a Bulette, how does nature react? This could be a story that would be particularly interesting if your party has a druid or ranger who is about some monstrosities. I think there's opportunity there, because if you have parties that are so dead set on saving every creature and not taking an innocent animal or monster's blood just because it's hungry, well, then rehoming it and making it a blight upon some other environment is certainly something you would have to consider. With whalefall, that does tend to refer to a death or absence of, so what changes, because this area no longer has a Bulette? What happens? Let me know what you think in the comments. Do you think there are other fantasy creatures that might take advantage of the Bulette fall? Or do you think it would just, I guess, be a bit more of a natural process, since unlike a whale's body, a Bulette's body would be exposed to natural sunlight in the environment that might help the decaying process along? A lot of stuff to think about, but let's move on to our third and final fantastical creature that I want us to spend a little bit time looking at, and you'll have to look real closely because it's the Mimic. I was recently watching some of the Wired's tech support series, So-and-So Answers Questions on different topics with experts with Magwife. We watched one about D&D. It wasn't the most interesting video to me because it was more so informative if you aren't in depth with the hobby, but nonetheless, it was done by Brendan Lee Mulligan, and in this video, he brought up mimics. He referred to the fascination with mimics and how a creature has biologically evolved to see survival and see getting resourceful, consistent food as shape-shifting into a treasure chest, and that offers a very interesting ecological nature conversation because yes, there's mimicry all throughout nature. There's butterflies that might try and appear as others to be witnessed as more poisonous or dangerous. There are animals that mimic the sound of predators to scare off other predators. Countless different elements, but something that's particularly interesting is that there is almost this element of critical thinking that we just have seen other animals adapt and react to the creation races and, well, react and adapt to humanity. In the real world, there are animals that can figure out where landfills are. There are animals that have adapted to living in a city. There are animals that have changed how they approach finding food because humans have inadvertently domesticated them. In a way, humanity has encroached upon their territory and given them no other option. What we've seen in the real world are the ways creatures have adapted in order to be able to survive and get food. But we're not talking about the real world. So what about mimics? What about a creature that has adapted to see its prey as the creation races themselves? Now, you could look at whatever dietary reason. In researching for this video, I came across the information that currently a human body averages for about 100 to 200,000 calories. It'd probably keep most of the creature full for a good long while, and with that, I think it's really meaningful to look at, again, this ambush predator that has adapted to perceive humans as its ideal prey, and beyond that has understood that it's not just the creation races that are the prey of the mimic. Most common folk, your blacksmiths, your tailors, your bartenders, farmers, they aren't the ones who are traveling into dungeons. Now, that's back to the apex predator, right? That's back to the adventurer. There's a lot that can be said about the world building in relation to mimics and why they're down in dungeons. What are they doing there in the first place? Again, did a wizard do it? Did whatever wizard have this dungeon under lock and key, put them there as guardians, or are they a natural life form that has found and adapted to the existence of dungeons in order to see them as places of general safety, but still accessible food? There's a greater conversation that can certainly be had, especially if we look at the ecology and the environment of a dungeon. A creature in the environment that has adapted to see the most dangerous of the creatures, a thoughtful predator that has complex thinking, tools, and technologies, and it sees it as an ideal target. Now that very much can bleed over into what we were talking about earlier, with maybe monsters aren't part of the ecology because they were never supposed to be there anyway, and they are more in environmental interaction, or like a calamity that might impact and certainly will affect it, but not necessarily outright be a part of every living system. I'd be all well and good with that if mimics didn't act so naturally like they were part of an environment. I mean, look at the Venus flytrap or the anglerfish, just other creatures that lure in their prey and then strike and ambush them. They don't have to move much, they don't even have to eat terribly much, because similar to what we had discussed with the owlbear and the Bulette, there are different levels of energy being used. I would address it in the discussion of these creatures when considering how I describe their behavior or even their motivations. Well, where do they get their food from? How stable is their food? For a mimic, it can't need a lot of food because otherwise it wouldn't be dressing up as a chest. But that being said, I think there's a lot more to consider. I could chew into any of these animals and really give it a greater, closer look of examination to see what the ecological role I see them playing. However, this short introductory video into the hyperfixation of ecologizing my D&D world is something that I've really been thinking about a lot recently. There's a lot more logic that can be given to help make these fantastical worlds be a bit more lively, a bit more grounded. If you're running a one-shot, don't worry about all this stuff. That's your little tip and challenge I'll tag into the end of this. This is purely here if you want to think about this, or as I said, if you have a druid or ranger who's particularly engaged with examining the habits or the environment to learn and empower yourself with these basics and this knowledge. So that way you can go back to your party and have this all available to them where you can describe these things and help them feel like they're playing more of a vital role in the story with this knowledge. Those are all the things that are part of making a more diverse world. So if you see yourself building a world and sticking to it, if you see yourself expanding upon it, or maybe even wanting to write a book, or if you just want to tell stories on a very nature-based floor plan, themes or narrative ecology of these fantastical creatures, I highly encourage you freshen up on it. As I said, there's plenty of resources out there for learning more. There are nature documentaries, and I can't stress enough how important those can be. Not only learning learning more just about the world, but for sparking up this conversation and creative thought in general. With that, I think I've held you guys hostage long enough. For you guys, leave a comment, let me know what you think, what other creatures you want to hear about in an ecological sense, and above all, be responsible and stay safe out there. Thanks, and thanks again. Till next time, adventurers.